The day it happened began like any other, quiet and unremarkable, which somehow made it feel worse. There was no fight, no dramatic moment, nothing to warn me that my parents were about to redraw the shape of our family without me in it. My hook into this memory is the same every time. The moment my mother smiled too brightly, that was when everything shifted. My name is Corin, and this is the day I learned exactly where I stood. I was sitting at the kitchen counter sipping lukewarm tea when my mother cleared her throat in that careful way she used whenever she wanted me to think I had a choice. My stepfather stood behind her with his hands clasped, looking entirely too pleased with himself. Then she said they had exciting news. They were taking Sarah to Disney for a full week. Her senior year had been stressful, and she needed a break before college applications consumed her life. I remember blinking slowly, waiting for the part that included me. It never came. Instead, my stepfather placed a hand on my shoulder and told me I was their rock, their responsible one, the person who kept things steady. They said it like praise, but it sounded like a verdict. They needed someone they trusted to stay home with the dogs. Someone who would not complain. Someone who would understand that Sarah deserved this family trip more than I did. I smiled, because that was my job. I nodded, because I always did. I said of course, because anything else felt like setting off an alarm they would pretend not to hear. I felt something bruise inside me, slow and deep, like a quiet ache pressed into place by years of similar moments. They spent the next few days preparing, buzzing with excitement. Sarah twirled around the living room, showing off outfits she planned to wear in photos. None of it was directed at me, yet every moment seemed pointed. Every packing decision was made out loud so I would hear. Every comment about how much fun it would be floated past me like an intentional reminder. When they left, they barely glanced back. The door shut, and the house exhaled, settling into a silence that felt heavier than I expected. The dogs nudged my legs, confused by the sudden stillness. I rubbed their heads until my hands shook. Then the photos started. At first, I tried not to look, but the notifications appeared anyway. Smiling faces, matching shirts. My mother with mascara smudged from laughing. My stepfather making silly faces. Sarah in a set of glitter ears, while both of them hugged her like she was the center of their universe. In every picture, they looked like a perfect family of 3. I realized after the third batch that I was no longer in the group chat at all. They had updated the name to Family Trip. I was only seeing what spilled through by accident. They had cropped me out digitally in the same way they had done in real life. I typed a single message. No worries. Have fun. That night I sat on the living room floor with the dogs curled around me. They breathed softly, warm against my legs, unaware that they had become my only assignment. My only role, my only purpose according to the people who claimed to love me. Something sharp surfaced inside me then, a clarity I had never allowed into focus before. I understood exactly where I ranked in this house, not first, not second, not even considered. But instead of breaking, something in me cooled. Not anger, not yet, something more controlled, more deliberate. I felt my thoughts begin to shift, like pieces lining up in a pattern that had always been there but never acknowledged. I began making plans, small ones, quiet ones, nothing dramatic, just possibilities I let myself think for the first time. What would happen if I left? Who I might become if I stopped waiting for a place at a table that was never meant for me. I stayed perfectly still while their vacation grew louder and louder on my phone. I stayed still while my own presence faded into something faint and unnecessary. Each photo they sent pressed the truth deeper into me until it became part of my spine. By the time they returned, my decision was already made. I disappeared. Not in body, not yet. First in intention, which is always where real disappearance begins. The strange thing about betrayal is how quickly routine can settle over it, like dust hiding the outline of something broken. While my parents were still posting photos of fireworks and character parades, I began the quiet work of slipping out of the life they believed I would never leave. It started with small decisions that looked harmless on the surface. I sorted through my closet, pulling out clothes I never wore and listing them online. I sold my old desk to a college student who thanked me while I stood there, wondering how much of myself I had buried in that particle board. I stopped buying anything that could not fit into a single backpack. I canceled subscriptions, closed accounts, deleted browsing histories. Every action felt like loosening a knot that had been tied around me for years. I quit my job on a rainy Wednesday morning. I sent a short, polite email to my manager, thanking her for the experience. She replied with a generic template, which made it easier. I packed up my workstation with a kind of numb clarity and walked out without telling a single coworker goodbye. It was strange how no one seemed to notice. That silence confirmed what I already knew. I had no real ties here, nothing that would hold me in place once I decided to move. At home, I continued to feed the dogs and water the plants as if nothing had changed. I kept the house neat, kept myself quiet, kept the illusion intact. My parents called once from the trip, their voices bright with excitement, telling me how grateful they were that I had everything under control. They talked more about Sarah than anything else. How happy she looked. How she really needed this. I murmured the right responses while looking at the open suitcase under my bed. When they finally returned, the house filled again with chatter and bags and plastic souvenirs that smelled faintly of sunscreen. They thanked me in a distracted way, offering a keychain shaped like a castle as if it were a medal. I accepted it with a smile and placed it on the kitchen counter where it remained untouched. They went back to their routines easily, slipping into familiar patterns without ever noticing that I had already stepped emotionally out of the home they believed I belonged to. 2 days later, before dawn, I slipped out with a backpack and a suitcase. The dogs watched me go with gentle confusion, their tails thumping once against the floor. I whispered goodbye to them because they were the only ones who deserved it. I turned off my phone after locking the door, the screen fading to black like the final page of a chapter I no longer wished to read. At the airport, I bought the first ticket that made sense, somewhere far enough that my absence would become a mystery rather than a concern, somewhere they would never think to look. When the plane lifted into the sky, I felt my old life peel away in layers. I was untethered for the first time, a ghost with a passport. In the months that followed, I moved through cities like a shadow, learning how to be someone new. I learned skills I never had time for before. I took online classes, met people who saw me as interesting rather than convenient, and began earning money in ways that relied on my mind rather than my compliance. I grew sharper with each step, more confident with each risk. Their messages shifted over time. At first they were casual, then confused, then worried. I saw the previews light up my inbox during rare check-ins, but I never opened them, not yet. They were calling out into a space I had already abandoned. Confrontation would come eventually, but not now. Now was for preparation, not for mercy. A year is a strange amount of time, long enough to shed a skin, short enough to remember exactly how it felt to live inside it. When I think back to the girl who fed the dogs while her parents played pretend family in another state, she feels almost fictional now. Soft-voiced, too patient, too hopeful. I barely recognize her, and I doubt anyone from that life would recognize me either. The world I built after leaving them did not happen all at once. It grew in layers, shaped by choices I never would have allowed myself before. At first, survival was my only goal. I worked small freelance jobs, followed online tutorials, and learned how to turn curiosity into skill. Each week came with a new challenge and a new version of myself. I lived in hostels, in rented rooms, in spaces that forced me to be resourceful. Every unfamiliar city honed me. Every stranger who underestimated me unintentionally sharpened my edges. Eventually, the small jobs turned into steady ones. My portfolio grew. People began to notice my work, not my history. The first startup that reached out to me was run by a pair of siblings in a cramped office above a bakery. They had more ideas than structure, and more determination than experience. I helped them organize their operations, streamline their processes, and approach clients they thought were out of reach. They treated me like someone with value, not like a convenient background piece. When they recommended me to a larger company, I listened. The next offer came from a firm expanding into multiple markets. They did not see a girl who had been left behind. They saw skill, strategy, and drive. They saw a future asset. I accepted their offer because for the first time, someone was offering me a place based on my potential, not my availability. Working with them felt like stepping into an entirely different world. They trusted me with decisions that held weight. They listened when I spoke. They compensated me fairly, something I had not realized I was allowed to expect. I became indispensable without meaning to. I learned to anticipate problems before they formed, to connect patterns others missed, to build systems that made the entire operation stronger. The more I worked, the more I felt myself settling into a version of my life that finally made sense. I was valued. I was respected. I was the opposite of how my parents had taught me to see myself. Then the company hit its first real obstacle. A competitor was expanding too quickly and too aggressively. Their strategies were sloppy, but they had deep connections and familiar patterns. When my director showed me the reports, I felt a strange chill of recognition. I knew that logo. I knew that building. I knew the culture behind every careless mistake. It was my parents' beloved workplace, the one they talked about like it was holy ground. I stared at the data and felt something dark and steady coil inside me. Life had placed a battlefield in front of me, perfectly tailored, like an invitation written in invisible ink. The irony tasted almost sweet. Still, I held myself back. Revenge was not ready to be served. Power needed time to ripen. My team began to brainstorm solutions, but each idea fell short because no one understood the competitor from the inside. No one except me. When my director asked if anyone had insight that might help, my hand lifted before my mind fully caught up. I volunteered quietly, calmly, as if this were just another task, and not the opening move of something much larger. They accepted my offer without hesitation. The moment settled into my bones like the click of a loaded chamber. Coming back to my hometown after a full year felt like stepping onto a stage I had once been relegated to sweeping. I did not return as the daughter they overlooked. I came back as someone who had built power quietly, far from their line of sight. The airport felt smaller than I remembered. The air thinner, as if the place itself sensed I was not here to slip back into old patterns. I checked into a hotel downtown, using a corporate card with my name on it, and stared at the skyline that had once felt like a cage. Now it looked like terrain to be studied. My parents found out I was back through a neighbor who saw me walking into the hotel lobby. Within an hour, my phone lit up with messages. They wanted dinner. They wanted explanations. They wanted to pretend the year had simply been a long silence between commercial breaks. I agreed to meet them because I wanted to see their faces when they realized I was not the version of myself they remembered. Dinner was at a chain restaurant they chose with the hopeful air of people selecting neutral ground. When I walked in, their expressions flickered with shock. My mother stared at the tailored jacket I wore. My stepfather blinked at the badge clipped to my bag. I sat down calmly and listened as they filled the space with excuses, with half-formed apologies, with declarations of worry that felt more like rehearsed lines than truths. They spoke about how they had meant well on that Disney trip, how it had been a misunderstanding, how they thought I loved caring for the dogs. I offered nothing at first. I let them sway in their own unease. I let them search my face for softness that no longer existed. When they finally stopped talking, I told them politely that my schedule was full, my priorities had changed, and that I was only in town for work. Their disappointment tasted like something distant and irrelevant. Outside the restaurant, I breathed in the cold night air and shifted my focus to what actually mattered. My assignment for the company had accelerated. I needed to assess my parents' workplace from the inside, without ever stepping foot inside the building. That meant talking to people who had once spoken to me like I was decoration. I visited my old job under the guise of networking. My former supervisor did not recognize me at first. When it clicked, he pretended he had always believed in my potential. His forced smile revealed the cracks in their structure long before the data confirmed it. I ran into old co-workers who had dismissed me in meetings and taken credit for my ideas. They now stumbled through awkward small talk and subtle fishing for opportunities. I smiled, listened, and walked away with information they did not realize they had given. Even Sarah's father greeted me with a surprised enthusiasm that barely hid his discomfort. He asked where I had been as if he deserved the answer. Sarah herself appeared one afternoon outside a cafe, wide-eyed and guilty, as if the entire world had shifted without her permission. Every encounter gave me more details. Every conversation revealed a weakness. I collected all of it. I mapped out the internal fractures of my parents' beloved workplace with the precision of someone who had learned to survive by paying attention to what others ignored. I did not strike. I was not ready. There was still more to gather, more to understand, more to sharpen. By the end of the week, the pieces had aligned. I could see the picture forming, clear and inevitable. The vulnerabilities were exposed. The leverage was in my hands. Everything I needed was finally within reach. The moment for destruction was coming, but not today. The morning everything came together, I woke with a kind of stillness I had never felt before. It was not excitement or fear, it was inevitability. My laptop glowed softly in the dim hotel room as I reviewed the final reports, each one a thread I had pulled with patience and intention. I had not needed to fabricate anything. The company my parents worshipped had been rotting quietly for years. All I did was illuminate the truth and place it in the correct hands. By the time the sun rose, the first agency had already opened an inquiry. By noon, 2 more followed. I watched it unfold like weather I had predicted long before the clouds formed. The collapse began with a single supplier withdrawing after receiving my compiled documentation. Their departure triggered penalties, which activated clauses in contracts no one had read carefully enough. Within hours, 2 partner companies paused all joint projects pending investigation. The competitor had always depended on appearing stable, but once the illusion cracked, the fractures widened with startling speed. I forwarded confirmations to my director, who read them with increasing astonishment. She asked how I had known where to look. I told her that understanding a structure was easy when you had once lived underneath it. As the afternoon passed, I continued sending evidence where it needed to go: financial inconsistencies, misreported data, ignored safety violations, and documented negligence. Every file was clean, every claim supported, every action within legal and ethical boundaries. I had not broken a rule. I had simply refused to let them hide behind the ones they had already broken. By the next morning, the company went into emergency shutdown. My parents were part of the crowd standing outside the locked doors, confused and terrified as news vans gathered. I watched from across the street, unseen, as they clutched each other and spoke into phones with shaking hands. Sarah stood beside them, wide-eyed, already understanding that her comfortable world was dissolving. I felt no triumph, only completion. Later that evening, I met my parents in their living room at their request. They looked smaller somehow, as if the loss of their stability had shrunk them. They asked if I knew anything about what had happened. I told them the truth with the same calmness I had used when feeding the dogs a lifetime ago. I told them they had made me responsible, so I became responsible for the end of the world they valued more than me. My mother sank into a chair as if her bones had forgotten their purpose. My stepfather stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Sarah whispered my name, but I did not look at her. I did not need their reactions. Their shock was only a final confirmation of how little they had ever understood me. There was no yelling, no desperation, no frantic attempts to undo what had been done. The truth settled over the room in a heavy silence neither of them could escape. When I stood to leave, no one tried to stop me. They knew they no longer had the right. Outside, the evening air felt warm and strangely gentle. My phone buzzed with messages from colleagues celebrating the victory, unaware of its deeper meaning. I walked down the quiet street, feeling a sense of closure that did not need celebration. It simply existed, clean and absolute. Everything they had built upon my invisibility had turned to dust, and I was finally free to walk away without leaving anything unfinished behind.